Today you're cooking up something great. Character voices. Forget about using an over-the-top accent because all you need are meat and potatoes. I'm TheAlpineDM. Let's get to it. When it comes to changing your voice, the most important thing is the meat, aka the mannerisms with which you speak. This is going to focus on how information is conveyed and communicated. So it includes things like talking speed, vocabulary, and enunciation. Next, we're going to dive into the potatoes, which are the physical aspects. So we'll be changing the sounds actually coming out of your mouth with things like volume, pitch, and the shape of your mouth. Part 1. Meat. I'm going to show you 5 different characteristics that you can play around with to come up with your character's voice. First is the cadence or rhythm of speech, which you can change by messing with the speed or adding in pauses. Some characters might talk really fast like this, which I like to use for gnomes and goblins and mad scientist type characters. Whereas other characters can really slow down their speech and draw out every word. This is perfect for speak with animals on larger creatures such as bears or mammoths, and if you have them in your setting for loxodons, elephant people. Or if a character uses pauses intentionally, it can add a lot of weight and suspense to every single word. This is great for political figures giving speeches or for NPCs that are very contemplative or deep in thought. Of course, pauses can be used erratically to give the effect of unnatural speech like with a warforged or construct. Next, you'll want to consider how a character says their words, which will often go hand in hand with their education or level of formality. Somebody who enunciates their words very clearly might be a librarian or a noble, whereas somebody who slurs their words is probably a bit less educated and maybe even a little intoxicated. And here's just another little example to show you both. Enunciate. Are you ready to head up the mountain? We have got to get going soon. Slur. You ready to head up the mountain? We gotta get going soon. Another aspect of a character's speech pattern is their word choice, which includes vocabulary or any slang and idioms that they use. In addition to enunciation, having a broad vocabulary is generally linked with more education or being a hoity-toity academic type, as I like to say. Well, the peasants are gonna stick to more simple, basic, short words. Of course, this doesn't need to be the case, and you can have a lot of fun with switching around expectations, or by having a dumb character trying to use big words incorrectly, such as a farmer turned detective who, whenever they have a theory, will say, "My working hypotenuse," instead of hypothesis. Real quick, thank you so much for watching. Please consider subscribing. It really helps me pursue my dream of being a full-time writer, and it helps the video get recommended to other people who are going to find value out of it. Thank you. That's all. In a similar vein, throwing in a bit of slang or idioms can give a lot of depth to your character's voice and will give a little bit of insight into their background. Implementing this step will most likely require a little bit of planning ahead because at least I think it's kind of hard to come up with these sort of more realistic, believable slang on the spot. But remember, they don't need to be perfect, and if you just sit down for a couple minutes, you can come up with some pretty good stuff. When you're brainstorming these, it's really important to keep in mind a character's profession and their social class. For example, if the character sees somebody just struggling to get a task done, if they're a noble, they might say that they're trying to joust without a horse. Whereas if they are more of a fisherman or laborer, they could say that they're flopping around on the deck. The next mannerism you can work with is tone, which can include their mood, any level of confidence, and an inflection or emphasis that they use. This one is getting a little bit into the potatoes, but I do still consider it more of how the information is conveyed versus just changing the sound coming out of your mouth. A highly confident individual will say things with authority and will not question themselves at all. Whereas a timid person is gonna have a lot more filler words, and everything they say kind of sounds like a question. The final bit of meat for a character's voice is their grammar and syntax. This one can be incredibly powerful if done correctly, but just be careful not to overdo it because it can probably get a little bit annoying. Consider the most iconic example of this, Yoda. Yes, there is a certain higher pitched and kind of gargly sound associated with his voice, but what really makes him memorable is the inverted sentence structure that he uses. Another great example is Gollum, who is made memorable in part due to his very odd grammar, especially concerning plural and subject-verb agreement. Think of "we needs it" or "Trixie hobbitses." But you can achieve a similar effect just by swapping around some of the words in your sentence or using past tense incorrectly. So instead of saying "what time is it?" you could say "what time it is." Or instead of saying "the black kobold ran towards me," they could say "the kobold black runned at me." Part 2. Potatoes. For the potatoes, it is helpful to remember that your voice is an instrument, and just like any instrument, the sound can be changed by making physical changes, whether it's how thick the string or the chords are, or by changing the length of how the air flows. I don't play instruments, so it's something like that, I'm sure. In this section, you're gonna learn 4 different ways to change the actual sounds coming out of your mouth, and they might seem very obvious and intuitive, but it's good to take a minute to think about how you can manipulate these sounds and what that means for your characters. First, you can change the shape of your mouth and how your tongue is placed. It might sound a little bit silly at first, but just try it, play around, and have some fun. Here's a couple examples to show you what I mean. You can purse your lips and not move them very much to have a more serious, almost Severus Snape type of character. You can push your jaw forward a bit, as though you had large tusks like an orc, to make your voice a bit more gruff and rough around the edges. You can take your tongue and put it to the side to have a character that has a little bit of a lisp, or maybe it's just like super really excited to meet real adventurers. In a similar vein, you can also have a bit more of a nasally voice and just close the airflow coming from your nose to, again, make this is almost more of a nerdy kind of academic type of character. You can also not use your upper lip at all, which is really great for skeletons and things that don't have fleshy bits. Next up is volume. Generally speaking, larger characters are going to have louder, booming voices, whereas smaller characters will have quieter, kind of soft-spoken voices. Just be sure that you're talking loud enough so that people at your table can actually hear you, but not so loud that you're just screaming at someone who's 2 feet away, because they will think you're ridiculous. Another physical characteristic to play around with is pitch, which is also generally associated with size, but also with gender. Males are going to tend to have a bit of a lower voice, whereas females and children can have a slightly higher pitched voice. Finally, you can modulate the amount of air that you're using to speak by either constricting or opening up your throat. By constricting the air, you can have more of a gravelly kind of gruff voice, which is perfect for monstrous creatures and old people. Just be careful not to overdo this one too much, especially if you're new with it, because you could cause a little bit of strain or damage to your vocal cords. And as always, the most important tip is to drink lots of water. On the other hand, using a lot of extra air while speaking can give a kind of flowy and ethereal quality to your speech. Like if they're a ghost or someone through a dimensional portal. This one is honestly a little bit tricky for me and it could use some practice, but I think you kind of get the idea. And of course, the best way to develop a character's voice is to actually know who the character is. So you can check out this video or find the link in the description to see my system for making awesome NPCs every single time. Thanks.